The Vanguard fleet soared into the unknown, a silver wave of human ambition cutting through the cold, uncharted depths of space. Commander Sarah Hayward stood on the bridge of the flagship Epsilon, gazing at the swirling vortex of stars outside the viewport. The weight of the mission was palpable in the air, a feeling shared by everyone aboard. This was no ordinary expedition. This was humanity's boldest step into a universe teeming with unknown dangers. They were the pioneers, the first to answer the call of the stars. And with that came a responsibility they could not afford to ignore. "Commander," reported Lieutenant Marcel, her eyes glued to the holographic display, "we're entering the outer rim. Sensors are picking up strange anomalies, gravitational fluxes, energy readings we've never seen before. We should proceed with caution." Sarah nodded, but there was no fear in her eyes. Fear was a luxury she could no longer afford. The Epsilon and its fleet were equipped with the best technology Earth had to offer: stealth systems, advanced weapons, and the most experienced soldiers. But even with all of that, she knew they were venturing into the unknown. That uncertainty, however, only fueled her resolve. "Keep the shields up and stay alert," Sarah ordered, her voice steady. "We'll proceed, but keep scanning the perimeter. This could be the edge of something vast." As the ships advanced deeper into the dark, the vast emptiness of space seemed to stretch endlessly before them. But then, something strange happened. A ripple appeared in the fabric of space itself, a wave that reverberated through the fleet. The sensors flickered, and an eerie silence enveloped the bridge. "Report," Sarah demanded, her heart racing. "Something's wrong, Commander," Marcel said, her voice laced with unease. "The energy surge, it's coming from ahead. It's like nothing we've encountered." Before anyone could react, a blinding light erupted from the front of the fleet, followed by a violent tremor that rattled the ship. The crew braced themselves as alarms blared, and the entire ship lurched violently to the side. The Epsilon stabilizers struggled to maintain control, and the other vessels in the fleet began to fall into disarray. "We're losing control," shouted Ensign Ramirez from the control panel. "Gravitational forces are spiking. All ships are off course." The holographic display shifted, showing multiple ships veering dangerously close to the gravitational pull of an unseen force. A black hole? A wormhole? No one knew. Panic began to ripple through the crew as the first ship, Saber, a smaller scout vessel, began to spiral uncontrollably toward the mysterious phenomenon. "Send a distress signal. Get Saber back on course," Sarah barked, her mind racing. But even as she spoke, Saber vanished from the sensors, consumed by the darkness. There was no time to mourn, no time for hesitation. "Revert course. Full power to shields now," Sarah commanded. The fleet's engines roared to life as they attempted to break free from the pull of the anomaly, but it was too late. Another ship, Artemis, was next to disappear, pulled into the unknown void without a trace. "Commander, we can't pull out of this," Lieutenant Marcel cried. "The storm's not just a natural phenomenon. This is something engineered." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. An engineered anomaly? Was this some kind of trap? Was there an enemy waiting for them, lying in wait? She gripped the armrests of her command chair, staring at the distortion unfolding before them. "Brace for impact," Sarah shouted. She had one chance left to save her fleet. If they couldn't break free, there would be no Vanguard left to lead. With all the power the Epsilon could muster, she swung the ship into an evasive maneuver, hoping to avoid the pull of the storm. The ship groaned under the stress, but it held, for now. "Status?" Sarah demanded, already plotting their next move. "We're stable for now," Marcel replied, her voice tight. "But it's not over, Commander. Whatever this is, it's just getting started." Sarah stared into the swirling chaos outside the window. The Vanguard had crossed into a territory far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. What lay ahead was no longer about exploration. It was about survival, And now, Earth's first pioneers would have to lead the charge against an unknown enemy, or die trying. The Epsilon shook again, this time with a bone-rattling intensity. The gravitational pull of the anomaly, whatever it was growing stronger. Sarah gripped the armrests of her command chair, her knuckles turning white. She wasn't the only one. Every member of the crew was locked into their stations, their faces etched with fear, but also determination. The Vanguard had survived the first assault, but the worst wasn't over. "Report," Sarah demanded, her voice cutting through the tension. "We're holding steady, Commander," Lieutenant Marcel said, her eyes flicking to the fluctuating data on her console. "But the anomaly, it's getting worse. If we don't break free soon, we'll be trapped." "Can we chart a way out?" Sarah asked, trying to remain calm. She knew this wasn't just a natural event. Someone, or something, was manipulating the forces at play. "I can try," Marcel replied, tapping away at her controls. "But the distortion is messing with our navigation. It's like we're being hunted." "Hunted?" Sarah's voice hardened. "By who?" Before Marcel could respond, the ship's sensors emitted a warning beep, a bright red light flashing across the console. A shadow appeared on the edge of the fleet's sensors, just beyond the reach of the anomaly's gravitational field. The shadow was massive, a fleet of ships, but they didn't register on the radar, almost as if they were phased in and out of existence. "Commander," Marcel said, her voice filled with disbelief, "there's something out there. Ships, but they're vanishing, flickering in and out of our sensors. They don't appear on any known registry." "Thalaxians," whispered Ensign Ramirez from his station, his face pale. "It's got to be them. We're being lured into a trap." "That's not possible," Sarah muttered, her mind racing. The Thalaxian Empire was known for its brutality, but they weren't supposed to have technology like this. Technology that could manipulate space-time. Or were they? Earth's intel on the Thalaxian threat had always been limited. Could they have developed something so advanced in the years since the last contact? "Prepare for immediate evasive maneuvers," Sarah ordered. "All ships, break formation. If they're Thalaxian, we need to hit them before they can strike first." The fleet, still reeling from the previous disturbance, scrambled to adjust. But just as quickly as the phantom ships appeared on the sensors, they vanished again, only to reappear closer this time, much too close. A shadow loomed overhead, and then the eerie sound of alien warships cutting through space filled the air. They were real, and they were attacking. "Brace for impact," Sarah shouted. A massive, distorted energy blast streaked from the largest of the phantom ships, slamming into the Epsilon's shield. The ship lurched violently, throwing the crew into their harnesses. The energy pulse tore through the shields like paper, sending a shockwave that reverberated across the fleet. "We're under attack," Marcel cried. "Weapon systems online, but they're too close. Our guns won't have enough range." The Phantom fleet, now visible in its full terrifying form, emerged from the distortion. They were sleek, black ships, silent as shadows, their hulls adorned with eerie glowing symbols, foreign yet ancient. The ships flickered in and out of space, using some form of cloaking technology that made them nearly impossible to track. They were the perfect predators, waiting, watching, and now attacking. Sarah's pulse quickened. "Return fire, all ships." She had no idea how the fleet was able to track the Vanguard's every move, but she knew this wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for knowledge. Whoever controlled this technology controlled the future of the galaxy. But as the Epsilon's weapons opened fire, the alien ships shifted once more, facing out of range in a blink, then reappearing in another position, their weapons already trained on the fleet. One ship, the Saber, took the brunt of the next assault, its shields shattering in an instant. Before the crew aboard Saber could react, the ship was consumed by a burst of unrelenting fire. "Saber's gone," Ramirez shouted, his voice cracking. "They've—" A scream cut through the bridge as the Saber's explosion lit up the dark void. its shattered pieces drifting silently into space. The crew of the Epsilon stood frozen, staring at the wreckage. Sarah's mind whirled. She had to think. There was no time to grieve. They were outgunned, outmatched, and now they were in the sights of an enemy who could move faster than they could react. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that these attackers weren't just enemies. They were a warning. "All ships, stay close," Sarah barked. "Keep moving, keep firing. We're not dying here today. Whatever these things are, we're going to make sure they regret finding us." In the depths of space, humanity's first expedition was being tested, not by the vastness of the stars, but by an enemy who had mastered the art of hunting. And as Sarah stared out into the flickering dark, she knew this was only the beginning of the fight. The Vanguard would stand or they would fall. But they would face it together, and whatever came next, they would find a way to survive. The battle raged across the stars, a storm of flashing energy beams, and the deep hum of plasma cannons in the vacuum of space. The Epsilon was engaged in a desperate dance, weaving and dodging to avoid the devastating energy pulses of the Thalaxian ships. Despite their superior technology, the Vanguard wasn't backing down. Sarah Hayward's command was resolute, and the soldiers under her command followed her lead with unwavering determination. "Shields at 40%, Marcel reported, her voice strained as the ship shuddered from another blast. "We can't keep this up much longer, Commander." "Do we have any chance of countering their phasing technology?" Sarah asked, her mind working furiously. She knew the key to survival wasn't brute force, it was outsmarting the enemy. "We're working on it," Marcel replied, sweat beading on her forehead as she adjusted the ship's trajectory. "But their cloaking systems make them almost impossible to target directly. We're just not equipped for this level of advanced warfare." A violent tremor shook the ship as a pulse of energy slammed into the Epsilon's hull. The bridge lights flickered, and Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The Saber's destruction was still fresh in her mind. How many more ships would they lose before they were overwhelmed? "Commander, there's another anomaly forming up ahead," Lieutenant Ramirez said, his eyes wide with disbelief. "It's another one of those disturbances. It looks like a rift in spacetime, but it's huge. We might get caught in it." Sarah's gaze fixed on the darkened viewport, and her pulse quickened. The Thalaxians had already shown that they controlled this strange, dangerous technology, and now it seemed they were manipulating space itself. It was like they knew the Vanguard's every move, anticipated their actions before they could even execute them. She had to act fast before they were caught in another trap. "All ships, move to evade the rift. Full speed ahead," Sarah ordered, gripping the console as she felt the Epsilon's engines roar to life. But even as they accelerated, the Thalaxian ships shifted once more, facing into their path and opening fire without hesitation. The Vanguard ships scattered, but there was nowhere to hide in the vast emptiness of space. The Thalaxians moved with uncanny precision, their ships flickering in and out of existence, attacking with the brutal efficiency of a well-trained hunting pack. Sarah's mind raced as she looked at the fleet around her. The Saber was gone, and Artemis wasn't far behind. The remaining ships were losing power, their shields faltering under the relentless assault. If they didn't find a way to disrupt the Thalaxian phasing technology, the Vanguard would be lost. "Commander," Marcel said, her voice barely audible over the chaos of the bridge, "I've got an idea. It's a long shot, but we might be able to disrupt their cloaking tech with a focused electromagnetic pulse. If we can target the distortion at the right frequency, we might force them to drop their cloaks, but we'll need to get much closer. We'd have to risk exposing ourselves to a full-force attack." Sarah hesitated, her mind calculating the risks. The Thalaxians were relentless, and any misstep could mean the end of their fleet. But they had no other choice. She looked around at the faces of her crew, tired, battle-worn, but still resolute. They had come too far to falter now. "Do it," she said firmly. "We have one chance. Get us close, Marcel, and make it count. Marcel nodded, already shifting the ship's course toward the center of the Thalaxian fleet. As the Epsilon powered forward, the Thalaxian ships closed in, and the void around them erupted in a storm of energy fire. Sarah could see the flashes of weapons fire coming from all directions, each one narrowly missing the Epsilon as they pushed deeper into the heart of the enemy formation. The ship shook violently again as another blast hit. The lights flickered, and the hull groaned, but Marcel kept her hands steady on the controls. With every passing second, they drew closer to the heart of the Thalaxian fleet. Now, Marcel shouted. The Epsilon's engine surged, and a massive pulse of electromagnetic energy blasted from its core, radiating outward in a wave of crackling power. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The Thalaxian ships shimmered as if caught in some invisible web, their cloaks flickering and sputtering out of existence. Sarah saw them for the first time, massive, sleek vessels, their alien designs more intimidating than anything she had ever imagined. They looked like predators of the stars, designed to kill and nothing more. And then, just as quickly as they appeared, the ships phased back into their cloaks. They're adapting, Marcel cried. We've only got a few seconds before they vanish again. Focus fire on the largest ship, Sarah ordered, her voice cutting through the rising panic. All weapons, now. The Epsilon's weapons fired in a deadly arc, the barrage of plasma beams and ion cannons lashing out in a desperate attempt to land a hit. The largest Thalaxian vessel, the command ship, shuddered under the barrage, its shields flickering as it attempted to reassert its cloaking tech. But the electromagnetic pulse had given the Vanguard a brief window of opportunity, and for that moment, they struck with everything they had. A critical hit to the Thalaxian ship's engine core sent it spiraling, erupting in a flash of brilliant blue fire. The ship cracked apart in the vacuum of space, and the surrounding Thalaxian vessels hesitated, faltering for just a fraction of a second. It was enough. Move now, Sarah shouted. The Vanguard ships turned in unison, disengaging from the fleet in a coordinated retreat. But even as the Epsilon broke away, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this victory, though hard-earned, was temporary. The Thalaxians had underestimated humanity's will to survive, but they wouldn't make that mistake again, and neither would Sarah. The Epsilon broke through the chaos, its engines roaring as the ship made its retreat from the remaining Thalaxian fleet. Sarah Hayward stood at the helm, her eyes locked on the swirling void ahead. The battle had taken its toll, several Vanguard ships were crippled, and the fleet's numbers had been halved. Yet somehow they had survived, striking a decisive blow to the Thalaxians. The hunt had been momentarily called off, but it wouldn't be long before the enemy regrouped and came for them again. The taste of victory felt hollow in Sarah's mouth. They were alive, but barely, and she knew they couldn't keep running forever. "Status report," Sarah demanded, her voice firm despite the exhaustion weighing on her. "Shields are down to 10%, Commander," Marcel replied, her fingers flying across the control panel. "We've lost Artemis, Saber, and Lancer. The remaining ships are heavily damaged. We're running on emergency power. We need to get out of here before the Thalaxians regroup." "Where do we go?" Sarah asked, her gaze scanning the dark space around them. The anomaly they had encountered was still on the edge of their sensors, a faint distortion in the fabric of reality. The Thalaxians had come from that place, and Sarah was certain they would return. But for now, they needed a plan to regroup. "I'm plotting a course to the nearest uncharted system," Marcel said, her voice strained. "It's a long shot, but it's the best we've got. There's no sign of the Thalaxians following us, for now." Sarah's eyes narrowed as she processed the information. A retreat into uncharted space was risky, but they had no choice. The Thalaxians were relentless, and the odds of surviving another engagement were slim without reinforcements or a safe haven. She gripped the armrests of her chair, her mind working in overdrive. "Do it," she ordered. Plot the course. All ships, prepare for emergency jump. We're not sticking around to see if they've got reinforcements." Marcel nodded, quickly inputting the coordinates. The ship hummed as it began to charge its jump engines. Sarah turned her attention to the holographic map of the fleet, each ship's damage status flashing red. The Vanguard was a shadow of its former strength, and if they didn't find a way to recover quickly, they would be sitting ducks for any future attacks. As the ship's engines powered up, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The Thalaxians were too methodical, too precise. They had tracked the fleet across the stars with an ease that spoke of intelligence far beyond what Earth had encountered. Sarah had thought the Thalaxians were a distant threat, something humanity would deal with in the far future. Now they were on the cusp of extinction, and the alien empire seemed determined to wipe them out. Jump in 3, 2, 1. Before Marcel could complete the countdown, the bridge was flooded with a blinding flash of light. A ripple of energy surged through the ship, sending it reeling. The crew braced themselves as alarms blared, and the Epsilon systems faltered. The jump engines sputtered, and the ship lurched forward in a violent surge. "Damn it!" Marcel shouted, her hands flying over the controls. "The jump didn't stabilize. We're not where we should be." Sarah's heart skipped a beat as the ship's sensors blinked erratically. They hadn't entered the intended system. Something was wrong. Worse, the rift in space ahead of them had grown wider, now pulling at the Epsilon's hull with a terrifying intensity. "Is it the Thalaxians?" Ramirez asked, his voice trembling. Sarah's mind raced. It wasn't the Thalaxians. They hadn't followed them this far, but someone, or something, was pulling them into the unknown. The gravitational pull intensified, the very fabric of space around them warping as the rift expanded, an unnatural force lurching at the ship's core. "Full power to the stabilizers," Sarah ordered, her voice unwavering. "We need to break free before we're pulled in completely." But as the ship struggled to power its systems, Sarah's eyes widened in horror. Emerging from the rift, slowly at first but gaining momentum, were dozens of ships, alien with technology unlike anything Earth had ever seen. These ships weren't Thalaxian, but they shared the same cold, menacing energy. The vessels were dark and sleek, and as they moved, they seemed to flicker in and out of existence like ghosts. "They're not Thalaxians," Marcel whispered, her face pale. "Who are they?" Before Sarah could respond, the alien ships locked their weapons onto the Epsilon's hull. A deep rumbling shook the ship as the first barrage of energy struck, tearing through the outer layers of the hull with frightening ease. "Commander, we're being targeted," Ramirez shouted. "The rift is collapsing in on us." "Get us out of here now," Sarah screamed. But the alien fleet was closing in faster than they could react. The Epsilon's engines were struggling to keep them afloat in the warping space, and the remaining ships in the Vanguard fleet were in no better shape. As the first wave of energy blasts slammed into the Epsilon again, Sarah realized that their worst fears were unfolding before them. They were facing not just one enemy, but an entirely new threat, and this time there would be no escape. The rift had brought them to the edge of extinction. The Epsilon shuddered as another blast rocked the ship, sending sparks flying from the control panels. Sarah's knuckles whitened as she gripped the armrests of her chair, her eyes scanning the chaos unfolding around them. The alien fleet that had emerged from the rift was unlike anything the Vanguard had encountered before. These ships weren't simply advanced. They were beyond human comprehension, their weapons tearing through the Epsilon's defenses as if they were made of paper. "Status report." Sarah barked, her voice cutting through the din of alarms. Marcel's fingers flew across her console, her face a mask of grim determination. "Shields are at 5%, Commander. We're losing power fast, and the hull integrity is failing. We're not going to make it much longer if we don't do something." The ship was beginning to fall apart around them, its engines sputtering as the alien fleet pressed in. The rift had them in its grip, and every moment that passed brought them closer to its unknown, all-consuming depths. If the Epsilon and the remaining Vanguard ships didn't find a way out, they would be pulled into whatever dark void lay beyond. "Get us out of here," Sarah snapped, but even as she spoke, another pulse of energy slammed into the ship, sending it careening off course. The view screen flickered and distorted, revealing the alien ships closing in, their dark forms flickering and phasing like specters. The ships didn't just move through space, they seemed to bend it to their will. Each one seemed to phase in and out of reality with unnatural precision, reappearing at different angles, attacking from every side. There was no place to hide. "Commander, they're locking onto us," Ramirez shouted from his station. "Weapons are charging up. Brace for impact." The air seemed to freeze for a moment, and then a massive, blistering beam of energy shot from the lead alien ship, striking the Epsilon's hull directly. The ship lurched violently, and the entire bridge was engulfed in a blinding flash of light. Sarah's vision swam as the ship's systems flickered and dimmed. She could hear the cries of her crew, the desperate sounds of a vessel on the brink of destruction. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she fought to keep her focus. "Damn it!" Marcel cried, her voice cracking. "They've cut our engines. We're dead in the water." Sarah clenched her fists. If they didn't get their engines back online, they would be sitting ducks, easy targets for the alien fleet. But even as she thought it, a new surge of energy ripped through the ship, sending the crew stumbling. It wasn't the alien weapons. This time, it was something else. Something in the rift itself. "The rift," Marcel shouted, her eyes wide with terror. "It's destabilizing. It's pulling us in faster than we can move." The ship groaned as the gravitational pull of the rift intensified. Space seemed to stretch and twist around them, and the stars themselves flickered like distant fireflies. Sarah could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on her, the crushing certainty that they were being drawn into an abyss. "We're going to be pulled in," Ramirez screamed, his voice high with panic. "We're not giving up," Sarah said, her voice cold with resolve. "Marcel, reroute all remaining power to the engines. If we can't escape, we'll fight our way through." Marcel's eyes widened. "Commander, we're already running on fumes. The alien ships will tear us apart before we get anywhere near enough power." Sarah's gaze hardened. "We don't have a choice." She stood, her mind moving faster than her body could react. If they couldn't outrun the rift, they would have to fight their way through it. But the alien fleet was relentless, and if their weapons continued to tear into the ship at this rate, the Epsilon would be nothing more than debris. There was one other option, one that only the most desperate of commanders would consider. The rift was a distortion in space-time. If they could disrupt it, create enough interference to weaken its hold on them, they might just have a chance. But it was a long shot, a gamble that could tear the ship apart. "Marcel," Sarah said, turning to her chief engineer, "I need you to reroute all power to the rift's stabilizers. Can we create a feedback loop, something that will destabilize the rift and push us out?" Marcel's eyes widened as the gravity of Sarah's plan settled on her. "You're asking us to fight against a cosmic force, with no way of knowing if it'll work. Commander, we'll be risking everything." "I know," Sarah said, her voice steady. "But if we don't try, we die. All of us, the Thalaxians, this alien fleet, the rift, this is our only chance to survive." Marcel hesitated for a moment longer, but then nodded. "Aye, Commander, I'll make it work." Sarah turned to the rest of the crew. "Everyone, prepare for an all-out maneuver. This is going to get rough, but we're going to make it out of here. Together." As Marcel and the engineering crew began their desperate work, Sarah looked out at the fleet of alien ships, the rift growing larger by the second. She knew this wasn't just a fight for their survival, it was a fight for humanity's future. If they could survive this, they would be ready for whatever came next. But if they failed, the universe itself would have one less star to look up to. The ship's hull groaned in protest as the Epsilon strained against the crushing gravitational force of the rift. Every system in the vessel seemed to be in a state of failure, lights flickering and alarms blaring in an unholy chorus. The alien fleet circled like vultures, their weapons primed to finish what the rift had started. Each blast that struck the Epsilon felt like the death knell of humanity's last hope. "Commander, we're running out of time." Marcel's voice crackled over the comms, anxiety in her tone. "The rift is accelerating. It's destabilizing at a faster rate than we can counter. We won't have the power to make the jump if we don't act now." Sarah's eyes narrowed as she stood by the bridge's command console, her mind working frantically. The ship was on the edge, barely holding together, and every passing second brought them closer to annihilation. Their engines were offline, their shields were nearly gone, and the alien fleet was closing in for the kill. Yet, amidst the chaos, Sarah felt a strange calm. She had seen humanity's greatest strength before. When cornered, they fought not just for survival, but for the hope of a future. "We'll fight," Sarah said, her voice resolute. "We're not letting this end here." She turned to Marcel, whose fingers were flying over the damaged console, trying to reroute power through failing systems. The engineer's brow was furrowed in concentration, her face pale but determined. "We've rerouted what's left of the power to the stabilizers," Marcel reported, "but we need more. We need to overload the rift's energy signature, force a disruption. If we can cause enough instability, we might break free. But it's going to be catastrophic." Sarah's mind raced. The idea was insane. If they couldn't control the feedback loop, the ship would be ripped apart. But there was no choice. The alien fleet wasn't giving them any room for a safer option. They had to take this risk. They had to bet everything on this one last, desperate move. "Do it," Sarah ordered. "We're all in. Give everything we've got." Marcel hesitated for a moment, glancing at the crew around her, and then nodded. "Aye, Commander. Brace yourselves." The entire ship seemed to groan as Marcel initiated the process. The Epsilon shuddered violently, a deep hum vibrating through its core as the overloaded stabilizers began to power up. Energy surged, flashing through the ship's systems like a wild storm. The entire crew was thrown against their seats as the ship lurched forward, its remaining thrusters flaring to life in a desperate attempt to stabilize them. Outside, the alien fleet seemed to sense the shift. Their ships accelerated, facing in and out of existence, their weapons primed to obliterate the Epsilon before it could escape. The rift itself began to distort more violently, energy crackling and warping space in a chaotic dance. Then, it happened. A flash of blinding light erupted from the Epsilon's core, followed by an intense burst of electromagnetic energy. The ship shook so violently that it felt like the entire structure would be torn apart. The alien fleet, unprepared for the sudden surge of power, hesitated, giving Sarah a brief window of time to act. "Now, Marcel," Sarah shouted. With a final push, Marcel slammed her hand down on the control panel, directing the full force of the ship's remaining power into the rift's destabilizing forces. The rift itself began to pulse erratically, warping and collapsing in on itself. For a split second, everything seemed to freeze, space itself bending, twisting, and thin. The rift detonated. A blinding shockwave ripped through space. The Epsilon was flung violently forward, the shockwave of the rift's collapse throwing the alien ships back. The entire fleet staggered, their ships flickering wildly, unable to regain their footing as the rift collapsed into nothingness. The sheer force of the energy surge was like a cosmic hammer, and the alien vessels reeled, some of them disappearing into nothingness, their systems overloaded by the cataclysmic event. The Epsilon, thrown in the wake of the explosion, was thrown from the rift's gravitational pull. Sarah and her crew gritted their teeth as the ship pitched and rolled uncontrollably, the alarms screaming, the hull groaning under the strain. Yet, amidst the chaos, they managed to stabilize. Status report, Sarah demanded, her voice firm despite the pain lancing through her body from the ship's violent shake. Marcel was already scanning the readouts, her fingers trembling as she ran the diagnostics. We did it, she said, her voice a mix of disbelief and awe. The rift collapsed. The alien fleet is in disarray. Some of them, they're gone. We've got a small window to make the jump, Commander. Sarah took a breath, letting the weight of the situation settle. They weren't out of danger yet, but they had done the impossible. The rift was gone, the alien fleet in disarray, and the Epsilon was still intact. It was a small victory, but in this war, it was everything. Prepare the jump, Sarah ordered. We're getting out of here, for now. As Marcel and her crew scrambled to make the jump, Sarah allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. They had made it through the impossible. But the war wasn't over. The Thalaxians, the alien fleet, this was just the beginning. And if humanity was to survive, they would have to keep fighting, no matter the odds. The Epsilon surged into motion once more, its engines roaring to life as it broke free from the remnants of the rift. Ahead of them, the stars stretched out in a vast, uncharted expanse. And somewhere, beyond the reaches of this dark corner of space, Earth's last hope lay waiting. The Epsilon drifted through the quiet void, the hum of its engines the only sound that filled the bridge. The jump had been successful, but the journey was far from over. The alien fleet that had once surrounded them was now lost in the collapsing rift, but the crew knew better than to think the danger had passed. There was a heavy silence aboard the ship, each crew member processing what had just happened. For all the chaos they had survived, they knew they were still deep in uncharted space, far from home and vulnerable. Sarah stood at the command console, staring out into the unknown. The stars that dotted the blackness ahead of them were distant, cold points of light, offering no promises, no comfort. She could feel the weight of the moment, the knowledge that they had just barely escaped extinction. But escaping wasn't enough. Not anymore. Commander, Marcel's voice broke through the tension, her tone clipped. The systems are stabilizing, but we've got major damage to the propulsion systems. We can't go anywhere fast, and we're running low on fuel. Sarah exhaled slowly, her gaze flicking over to the holographic map of their position. They had traveled far, but not far enough. The Thalaxians were still a looming threat, and whatever strange alien fleet had emerged from the rift wasn't something they could ignore. Their only hope was to find a safe haven, a place to lick their wounds and regroup, but there was no guarantee that such a place existed. How much time do we have? Sarah asked, keeping her voice steady. Marcel didn't hesitate. Less than a day before we're completely dead in the water. Sarah turned, her mind working at a rapid pace. Every decision from here on out would determine the fate of her crew and the future of humanity. The options were few, and none of them were good. They could attempt to limp back to the nearest known systems, but that would put them on a direct course back to Thalaxian space. They could try to make a jump further into uncharted space, but with the damaged systems and low fuel, they risked becoming easy targets for anyone or anything waiting out there. Any signs of Thalaxian ships nearby? Sarah asked, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the readouts. Ramirez, standing at his post, quickly checked the sensors. Nothing yet, Commander. The Thalaxians aren't anywhere close, but that doesn't mean they're not coming. Then we need to keep moving, Sarah said decisively. Marcel, find a course to the nearest inhabited system, one that hasn't been hit by the Thalaxians or that alien fleet. I don't care how far it is, we can't afford to stay here. Marcel nodded, tapping rapidly at her console. I'll get it plotted, but if we don't have enough power to make the jump, we'll figure it out, Sarah interjected, no matter what it takes. Just then, a sharp beeping filled the bridge, cutting through the tension. Marcel's face drained of color as she looked at the readout. Commander, she said, her voice urgent. We've got a signal. It's not the Laxian, but it's coming from a nearby system. They're broadcasting on a distress frequency. Sarah's heart skipped. A distress signal could mean any number of things, but if it was coming from another human vessel or colony, it could be a lifeline. Can we trace it? Sarah asked, her mind already racing with possibilities. Marcel's fingers flew over the controls. I'm locking in on the source now. It's coming from a planetary system about 30 light years out. The signal is weak, but I can make out a few key details. They're asking for immediate assistance. Apparently, they've been under siege for weeks. Sarah frowned. Siege? By whom? I can't get a clear read on the attackers, Marcel replied. But the signal's distress code is human. It's definitely from a Federation outpost or colony. A glimmer of hope sparked in Sarah's chest. A human outpost meant that the Vanguard wasn't alone out here. They weren't the last of humanity. We're going, Sarah said, turning toward her crew. No one gets left behind. Prepare for the jump. The crew scrambled into action, their tired faces hardening with resolve. Even in their weakened state, the Epsilon's crew was still a formidable force. They had made it this far against impossible odds, and now they had a chance to make a real difference. Marcel nodded, her fingers moving quickly over the ship's control systems. We've got enough power to make the jump, just barely. But we'll need to be careful when we come out of it. The system's close enough to the edge of the rift's gravitational influence. We don't want to end up back where we started. Sarah nodded, feeling the familiar rush of command settle over her. The Epsilon was a wounded ship, and her crew was tired, but there was a fire in their hearts. They had survived against all odds, and now they had a chance to find a new purpose, one that could push them beyond survival and into the heart of humanity's fight for the stars. The countdown began, the hum of the ship's engines reverberating through the hull as the Epsilon prepared to make its next jump. Sarah looked out the viewport one last time before the jump. The stars stretched out before them, distant and indifferent, but she knew, somewhere out there, was the hope of a new beginning. For humanity to endure, they had to fight for it, even if that fight meant risking everything. With one last glance at her crew, Sarah Hayward issued the final order. Jump, now. The escape pods launched with the familiar jolt of accelerated motion, ejecting the crew of the Erebus into the cold expanse of space. Rourke gripped the controls tightly, his thoughts clouded by the loss of the ship and the enormity of their sacrifice. Around him, the rest of the crew scrambled to secure their harnesses, eyes wide with disbelief. Maeve glanced out the viewport, watching as the colossal energy pulse expanded outward, rippling through space like a shockwave across the ocean of stars. The once menacing apex swarm had been reduced to nothing more than cosmic debris. Yet even in victory, a heavy silence settled over the crew. The Erebus was lost, and they were now stranded in the unknown. Rourke's voice, though tired, cut through the quiet. Status report. Maeve checked her console, her voice tinged with exhaustion. All systems are functional, the pod's shields are holding, but we've lost contact with the alien fleet. They're gone. Gone? Sato echoed, his face drawn with concern. Do you mean they didn't survive the pulse? It looks like it, Maeve replied. They were caught in the wake of the energy blast. I think we were the only ones who managed to survive the fallout. Rourke let out a long breath, staring at the swirling mass of stars outside the pod's viewport. In the silence that followed, it was clear that the stakes had just changed. They had won, but at what cost? The galaxy they had fought to protect was now silent, unknown, unexplored, and they had no way of knowing if any other civilizations were left to rebuild or what would come next. Prometheus's voice crackled from the pod's communication system. The vault's pulse was successful, Captain. However, I must inform you that the remaining Apex remnants will likely regroup, but it will take them considerable time to recover. You've bought the galaxy a temporary reprieve, but the war is not over. Rourke closed his eyes for a moment, his heart heavy with the burden of what they had accomplished. I don't care about the war. We need to get back home. Sato shook his head, his voice laced with disbelief. Home? Captain, do you realize how far we are from Earth? Even if we're lucky, we're talking about decades to return. Our fuel reserves won't last more than a few months. Rourke's gaze met Sato's. Then we'll make our own way home. We'll adapt. We always do. Maeve spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. Captain, I'm detecting something. A signal, weak, but it's coming from a nearby star system. Another signal. Rourke asked, incredulous. Yes, Maeve said, zooming in on the signal's coordinates. It's similar to the one we followed here, but it's not the same. This one is different. It's an invitation, Captain. Not a plea for help like the last one. It's a beacon, and it's aimed directly at us. Rourke stared at the screen, his mind racing. Another signal. A new chapter. Plot a course, he ordered. The crew exchanged uncertain looks, but followed Rourke's lead. The Erebus may have been lost, but humanity's journey was far from over. They were no longer simply fighting for survival. They were exploring the unknown, standing on the threshold of a new era. As the escape pods drifted toward the distant star system, Rourke felt a flicker of hope stir within him. The future was uncertain, but humanity had just proven something to the universe. They were survivors, innovators, and they weren't done yet. The final frontier had only just begun.